Yes, get ready for the legal dictation containing 720 words at the speed of 90 words per minute. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, start. Reliance was placed on the decision of this court in the case of Kaushalya Devi. The learned counsel relied on the observation made in para 11 at page 595 of the report and contended that the gravity of a complaint under the NI Act cannot be equated with an offence under the provisions of Indian Penal Code and further urged that this court held that a criminal offence under section 138 of the NI Act is almost in the nature of a civil wrong which has been given criminal overtones. Reliance was also placed on the judgment of this court in the case of Mandvi Cooperative Bank Limited as reported in 3 SCC 83. This court in Mandvi discussed the scope of NI Act, including the First Amendment to the Act inserted under Chapter 17 in the Act. This court looked into the statement of objects and reasons introducing the amendment and noted the rationale for introduction of section 147 of NI Act. Section 147 of NI Act made the offences under the said Act compoundable. The court noted that from the statement and objects and reasons, it is clear that the Parliament became aware of the fact that the courts are not able to dispose of in a time bound manner large number of cases coming under the said Act in view of the procedure in the Act. In order to deal with such situation, several amendments were introduced and one of them is making offences under the said Act compoundable. This court fails to understand the applicability of the principle laid down in Mandvi to the facts of the present case. It is no doubt true that section 147 of the NI Act makes an offence under NI Act a compoundable one. But in order to make the offence compoundable, the mode and manner of compounding such offences must be followed. No contrary view has been expressed by this very court on the nature of the offence under NI Act. Learned counsel for the appellant also placed reliance on a decision of this court in the case of Damodar Prabhu as reported in 5 SCC 663. In paragraph 4, this court held that the dishonor of a check can be best described as a regulatory offence. The court also noted the situation that large number of cases involving dishonor of checks are choking the criminal justice system and putting an unprecedented strain on the judicial functioning. In paragraph 7 of the judgment, this court noted the submissions of the learned Attorney General to the extent that the court should frame certain guidelines so as to motivate the litigants from seeking compounding of the offence at an early stage of litigation and not at an unduly late stage. It was argued that if compounding is early, the pendency of arrears can be tackled in paragraph 12 of Damodar case. This court dealt with the provision of section 147 of the NI Act and held that the same is an enabling provision for compounding of the offence and is an exception to the general rule 5 incorporated in subsection 9 of section 320 of the code. This court harmonized the provision of section 320 of the code along with section 147 of NI Act by saying that an offence which is not otherwise compoundable in view of the provisions of section 320 subsection 9 of the code has become compoundable in view of section 147 of NI Act, and to that extent section 147 of NI Act will override section 320 subsection 9 of the code, since section 147 of NI Act carries a new clause. This court, on the basis of the submissions of the learned Attorney General, framed certain guidelines for compounding of offence under section 138 of the NI Act. The court held in paragraph 26 of Damodar that those guidelines have been issued by this court under Article 142 of the Constitution in order to fill up legislative vacuum which exists in section 147 of the NI Act. The court held that section 147 of the NI Act. Stop. Yes. Get ready for the general matter dictation containing 720 words at the same speed. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Start. The debate generally, madam, has strayed beyond the scope of the report of the committee. In fact, it has almost been a general resume of the work of this House for the past 12 years. Of the opportunities we have had, or of the opportunities we could have had, and that sort of thing. Although many members have touched on many points, still amendments have been tabled only a few of the rules. But I do not mean to say that their references to the several points are not quite relevant. Certainly, they are relevant and they are very useful suggestions. In fact, this debate has been very valuable in throwing much light on the report of this committee. There is no time at my disposal, so I will very briefly cover some of the points which need reply. Of course, many points do need reply, but I will take some points which are very relevant and reply very briefly. Before going to that, I would mention that there was a very factual error committed by one of the honorable members when he said that although we were revising our rules at this later stage, still we had an advantage over the other house which had not yet done this work. It is not correct. The other house had adopted the rules under Article 118 on the 22nd December 1986, and later on also the other house had modified those rules. One or two modifications were adopted next year. So that is not factually correct. Now, much of the criticism or suggestion or discussion has centered round the subject of questions. About questions, three parts have been made: admissibility of questions or rejection of questions, answering questions, and then the various clauses that determine the nature of questions. These are the three aspects on which several members have made remarks. Now, with regard to admissibility, several members have cast some reflection on the Secretariat. Well, the Secretariat can only go by the rules, by the conditions prescribed here, unless we say that these conditions or qualifications for a question should not be there. I do not think we can blame the Secretariat. You will remember, Madam Deputy Chairman, that I was one of those who were putting many questions, and I also had the misfortune to have many of my questions rejected. It is true, as many of the honorable members have said, that questions which have been rejected on one ground have been admitted again on the same ground. It has happened like that. But that depends upon the particular person handling the question and his interpretation put upon that. However much we may put down these rules, however much a foolproof framework we can devise for the guidance of those who have got to function and deal with these questions, still there is the subjective element which we cannot avoid, and it is a matter of interpretation. Therefore, we should not blame the Secretariat, because nobody can say that they do it with any malified intention. All that we can say is they can exercise their judgment either wrongly or correctly or indifferently. So it is open to every member, when he feels that his question ought not to have been rejected, to go to the Secretariat, sit with the concerned section, and then discuss with them. That was what I was doing. That is what many of the members have been doing. Then, after a discussion, either the person understands that his interpretation was wrong or he convinces us that his interpretation was right and that the question as the rules are framed cannot be admitted. It must be realized that the admissibility or rejection of questions is in the name of the chairman. Although one section of the secretariat handles the question, still it is done in the name of the chairman. So it is not correct propriety to bring the secretariat into question here. The remedy is open to us to go to them and discuss with them. But the disappointment is there. I have also had that disappointment. It is true that when in one house on one ground a question is rejected, in another house on the same ground that question is accepted. Stop. Over.